45 dumb laws that still exist in America, and nobody knows why. Every year, lawmakers announce that outdated laws have been repealed. Systems get updated. Progress is declared. So let's ask a simpler question. If all that cleanup is really happening, why are there still laws on the books that sound like jokes, but come with real fines and real consequences? Somewhere in America, it is technically illegal to do something completely ordinary, something harmless, something you might have already done without ever thinking twice. Not because it's dangerous, not because it hurts anyone, but because a rule written decades ago was never removed. And that's the uncomfortable part. How many laws still exist, not because anyone believes in them, but because nobody ever bothered to question them? Some of these rules were created during moments of fear. Some were reactions to one strange incident that lawmakers overcorrected for. The world changed. Society moved on. The laws stayed. And a law doesn't need to be enforced every day to matter. It only needs to exist, quietly, legally, waiting. Maybe you've already crossed one. Maybe you just didn't know it counted. Today, we're opening the file on the strangest and most absurd experiments humanity has ever attempted. Fasten your seatbelts. Logic is about to die a spectacular death. The law that thinks your ice cream is a crime. In one American state, walking down the street with an ice cream cone in your back pocket is technically illegal. Not discouraged, not frowned upon, illegal. On paper, it can still result in a fine. This law didn't appear because ice cream is dangerous. It appeared in the 19th century as a workaround for horse theft. Horses would follow the smell of treats. Thieves realized they could steal a horse without touching it, just by letting it follow dessert. Lawmakers responded the only way they knew how, by criminalizing the pocket. The horses are gone. The theft method is gone. The ice cream industry has moved on. The law didn't. Today, the behavior is harmless. The context no longer exists. But the rule remains quietly enforceable, frozen in time like the dessert it targets. And here's the uncomfortable thought. You didn't break the law because you intended to. You broke it because history never cleaned up after itself. Fact 2. When your donkey is too comfortable. In Arizona, it is illegal to let a donkey sleep in a bathtub. Not abandoned, not mistreated, just asleep in the wrong place. This law dates back to 1924, when a local dam burst and flooded a ranch. A donkey resting in a bathtub was swept miles away, triggering an expensive rescue operation. Lawmakers decided the real problem wasn't the flood, it was the donkey's choice of furniture. The floodwaters receded. The rescue became a story. The bathtub remained innocent. The law stayed. Today, the scenario is almost impossible, yet the rule still exists, quietly suggesting that the state once looked at a natural disaster and concluded the bathtub was the liability. The donkey learned nothing. The system learned even less. Fact 3. The 5-minute kiss limit. In Iowa, public kisses lasting longer than 5 minutes are technically illegal. No one measured this with a stopwatch. The law emerged from early public decency codes designed to prevent what lawmakers considered excessive displays of affection. 5 minutes was not scientific. It was emotional guesswork written into law. Society changed. Public standards shifted. Romantic comedies happened. The rule never left. Today, the idea that affection becomes criminal after an arbitrary time limit sounds absurd. Yet the statute remains, pretending intimacy can be regulated like parking. The problem was never the kiss. It was the fear of not controlling it. Fact 4. When swearing requires a crowd. In Mississippi, swearing in public can be illegal, but only if 2 or more people hear it. This law comes from an era when profanity was treated as a social contagion. The logic was simple. 1 witness is a mistake. 2 witnesses make it a crime. Language evolved, public spaces got louder, online comment sections were invented. The law stayed frozen in a quieter century. Today, the rule quietly implies that morality depends on audience size. Alone, you're fine. Heard by 2 people, you're suddenly a public threat. It's not about words, it's about control, pretending to be manners. Fact 5. When sleeping at work becomes a crime. In South Dakota, falling asleep in a cheese factory is illegal. This law likely came from early industrial safety concerns, heavy machinery, long shifts, real risks. Instead of improving conditions, lawmakers chose the simpler route: criminalize exhaustion. Factories modernized, safety standards improved, cheese kept being cheese. The law stayed. Today, it reads less like safety regulation and more like a reminder that systems often respond to human limits by punishing them. The problem wasn't the nap, it was pretending people aren't human. Fact 6. When a fake mustache becomes a legal problem. In Alabama, wearing a fake mustache in church is illegal, but only if it causes laughter. The law comes from an era when religious spaces were tightly policed for decorum. The concern wasn't facial hair, it was disruption. Lawmakers simply picked the most obvious culprit, anything that made people smile at the wrong time. Church culture evolved, comedy evolved, irony became a language. The law stayed exactly where it was. Today, the rule quietly suggests that humor itself can become criminal, not because it harms anyone, but because it breaks the mood someone once decided was mandatory. The mustache was never the problem. Control was. Fact 7. When a photo requires government permission. In Wyoming, there was a law that made it illegal to photograph a rabbit without a permit during certain months. This wasn't about privacy. It came from wildlife protection efforts meant to prevent hunters from tracking animals during breeding season. Instead of targeting hunting, the law targeted cameras. Hunting methods changed. Cameras got smaller. Social media happened. The law remained quietly confusing. Today, it reads like a reminder that systems often respond to complex problems by banning the simplest thing nearby, even if it no longer makes sense. The rabbit didn't need protection from photos. The law just never got updated. Fact 8. When mixing drinks becomes a crime. In Nebraska, it's illegal to sell a drink that mixes beer and liquor. This law dates back to early temperance-era thinking, when lawmakers believed mixing alcohol types led directly to chaos. Beer was one category, liquor was another. Crossing the streams was the real danger. Bars evolved. Cocktails became an art form. Science got involved. The rule stayed frozen in moral panic. Today, it quietly insists that alcohol becomes more dangerous when it's creative. Not stronger, just combined. The problem was never the drink. It was fear dressed up as regulation. Fact 9. When your elephant needs supervision. In Oregon, it is illegal to leave an elephant unattended on a public street. This law comes from the circus era, when exotic animals were regularly transported through town. Lawmakers weren't joking. This was a practical concern at the time. Circuses disappeared. Elephants disappeared from streets. Common sense took over. The law stayed behind. Today, it reads like satire, quietly waiting for a scenario that no longer exists. Proof that laws don't expire just because reality does. Fact 10. When ice cream becomes evidence. In Alabama, it's illegal to carry an ice cream cone in your back pocket. The origin traces back to horse theft, when animals would follow treats, allowing thieves to claim the horse followed voluntarily. Lawmakers criminalized the dessert instead of the loophole. Horses left the streets, cars took over. Ice cream became a snack again. The law stayed untouched. The horse is gone, the theft method is gone. Only the rule remains, waiting for a pocket that no longer matters. Fact 11. When your pet isn't allowed to flirt. In Florida, it is illegal to have sexual relations with a porcupine. Yes, it's written down. Yes, it's specific. This law wasn't born from a wave of porcupine-related incidents. It emerged during a period when states rushed to codify animal cruelty laws, often writing hyper-specific statutes to cover every imaginable scenario. Society agreed animals should be protected. Language got cleaner. Law books got messier. The law stayed exactly as written. Today it reads less like protection and more like a reminder that lawmakers once tried to future-proof morality by imagining the worst possible behavior, and then never revisited the wording. The problem was never porcupines. It was fear of legal loopholes outliving common sense. Fact 12. When singing in swimwear becomes illegal. In Florida, singing in public while wearing a swimsuit can be illegal, depending on the location. This law dates back to early decency ordinances, when public beaches were treated as semi-private moral zones. Swimsuits were tolerated, singing was tolerated. Combining the two crossed an invisible line. Fashion changed, public behavior relaxed, beach culture exploded. The rule stayed awkwardly behind. Today, it suggests that morality was once measured not by harm, but by combinations of behaviors lawmakers personally found uncomfortable. Nothing changed except reality. The law never noticed. Fact 13. When a chicken crosses the wrong road. In Georgia, it is illegal to let chickens cross the road. This wasn't philosophical, it was practical. Loose chickens caused accidents, blocked carts, and disrupted traffic in early rural towns. Lawmakers solved it the only way they knew how: ban the chickens' movement. Roads modernized, traffic laws evolved, chickens mostly disappeared from streets. The law stayed intact. Today, it reads like a punchline, a literal answer to a joke that no longer needs explaining. The chicken didn't need regulation anymore. The system just never cleaned up after itself. Fact 14. When your Sunday activity is a crime. In Indiana, it was illegal to ride public transportation on Sundays. This law came from so-called blue laws, meant to enforce rest and religious observance. The goal wasn't transportation, it was control over time. Religion diversified, work schedules changed, weekends stopped being sacred. The statute stayed long after the belief system faded. Today, it stands as proof that laws can survive even after the values that created them quietly disappear. The bus wasn't sinful. The idea of rest was politicized. Fact 15. When a bath becomes a legal issue. In Arkansas, it is illegal for a man and a woman to bathe together unless they are married. This law was rooted in early morality codes, where private behavior was treated as public concern. Lawmakers believed enforcing virtue required legislating intimacy. Privacy norms evolved, relationships changed, society moved on. The law stayed frozen in an older worldview. Today, it doesn't regulate harm. It regulates assumptions, quietly insisting the government once believed it belonged in your bathroom. Fact 16. When whistling becomes suspicious. In some U.S. cities, it is illegal to whistle in public after a certain hour. This law didn't target music, it targeted crime, or what lawmakers once believed crime sounded like. Whistling was associated with signaling, loitering, and undesirable behavior. Rather than address crime directly, lawmakers banned the noise. Cities modernized, street lighting improved, phones replaced whistles. The law stayed. Today, it quietly suggests that sound itself can be suspicious, depending on who makes it and when. A reminder that control often starts with silence. Fact 17. When your socks are too colorful. In parts of the United States, wearing mismatched socks was once considered illegal under public decency rules. This wasn't about fashion, it was about conformity. Lawmakers believed appearance reflected morality, and anything too unconventional signaled disorder. Fashion exploded. Individuality became normal. Dress codes relaxed. The law never caught up. Today, it reads like proof that systems once tried to regulate personality, one sock at a time. Fact 18. When dancing requires permission. In some states, dancing without a permit was illegal. This law emerged from early efforts to control public gatherings. Dancing meant crowds. Crowds meant disorder. So lawmakers regulated movement instead of managing people. Music evolved, nightlife became an industry, dancing became exercise. The permit requirement stayed quietly in the background. Today, it reminds us that joy has often been treated as something that must be supervised. Fact 19. when fortune-telling is a crime. In several U.S. states, fortune-telling is still technically illegal. The law wasn't about predictions. It was about fraud, or rather, lawmakers' fear of it. Instead of targeting scams, they banned the entire concept of knowing the future. Psychics adapted. Entertainment blurred with belief. Skepticism became mainstream. The statutes remained unchanged. Today, the law still quietly insists that imagination itself can be illegal if it looks convincing enough. Fact 20. When your haircut offends the system. In some jurisdictions, it was illegal for men to have long hair. This law came from military influence and moral codes equating discipline with appearance. Short hair meant order, long hair meant rebellion. Culture changed, music changed, gender norms shifted. The law stayed where it was written. Today, it reads like a fossilized opinion about identity, preserved not because it's enforced, but because nobody bothered to erase it. Fact 21. When your refrigerator has an opinion. In some U.S. cities, it was illegal to place a refrigerator outdoors without removing the door. This law came from real accidents involving children trapped inside discarded appliances. Instead of regulating disposal practices, lawmakers focused on the object itself. Manufacturing standards improved. Safety warnings became mandatory. Parents became more aware. The rule stayed exactly as written. Today, it quietly treats every old refrigerator as a public threat, even when the context that created the danger has largely disappeared. The risk was real. The response never evolved. Fact 22. When a sandwich becomes a legal definition. In parts of the U.S., the legal definition of a sandwich has been debated in court. This wasn't about lunch. It was about zoning laws. Certain businesses were only allowed to sell sandwiches, forcing courts to decide whether items like burritos qualified. Food culture expanded. Menus diversified. Common sense struggled. The law demanded clarity. Reality refused. Today, the question isn't what people eat. It's how systems force simple ideas into rigid boxes they were never designed for. Fact 23. When sitting becomes suspicious. In several cities, it was illegal to sit on sidewalks. This law targeted loitering. Lawmakers believed standing implied movement, while sitting implied intent. Rather than address homelessness or public space use, they criminalized posture. Cities grew denser. Public benches disappeared. Urban life changed. The rule stayed behind. Today, it quietly suggests that rest itself can be suspicious, depending on where you do it. Fact 24. When your lawn can break the law. In some American towns, grass that grows too tall can result in fines or legal action. This law came from property value concerns and neighborhood aesthetics. Height limits were set, inspections followed, and enforcement became routine. Climate changed. Water restrictions appeared. Lawns became harder to maintain. The rules stayed strict. Today, the law still measures responsibility in inches, treating nature like a compliance issue. Fact 25. When laughing at the wrong time is a problem. In certain jurisdictions, disturbing a religious service, even by laughing, could be illegal. The intent was respect. The execution was vague. Any sound deemed disruptive could qualify. Cultural norms shifted. Interpretations broadened. Public spaces blurred. The law stayed subjective. Today, it quietly leaves humor at the mercy of interpretation, proof that silence has long been treated as obedience. Fact 26. When standing still is a problem. In some U.S. cities, it has been illegal to loiter without a clear purpose. This law wasn't about safety. It was about discomfort. Lawmakers believed that people who didn't look busy were suspicious by default. Instead of defining crime, they defined movement. Cities got denser. Public life slowed down. People waited for buses, friends, life. The law stayed vague on purpose. Today, it quietly asks you to justify your existence in public space. Not what you're doing, but why you're there at all. Fact 27. when a coin toss needs oversight. In some states, flipping a coin to decide a bet can be illegal. This law dates back to early gambling restrictions, when lawmakers feared games of chance more than systems of chance already built into society. Casinos opened, lotteries expanded, stock markets thrived. The coin stayed illegal. Today, the law suggests randomness is dangerous, unless the system profits from it. Fact 28. When clothes become a moral issue. In parts of the U.S., wearing sagging pants has been criminalized. This wasn't about safety, it was about appearance. Lawmakers framed it as public decency, even though the behavior harmed no one. Fashion shifted, generations changed, expression evolved. The rule stayed punitive. Today, it quietly reveals how quickly personal style can be recast as a legal problem when it makes the system uncomfortable. Fact 29. When a smile can be misread. In some jurisdictions, laws against suspicious behavior are broad enough to include smiling at strangers. The intent was prevention. The execution was paranoia. Instead of defining actions, the law criminalized interpretation. Social norms softened, anxiety increased, public trust eroded. The law stayed flexible, dangerously so. Today, it suggests legality can depend less on what you do and more on how someone else feels about it. Fact 30. When common sense needs a permit. In several towns, holding a small gathering without a permit has been illegal. This law emerged from crowd control efforts. Lawmakers feared assemblies not because they were violent, but because they were unpredictable. Technology changed. Meetups became casual. Community became informal. The permit requirement stayed formal. Today, it quietly implies that people gathering freely is still something the system would prefer to supervise. Fact 31. When your shadow can be illegal. In some cities, laws against obstructing public passage have been used to penalize people who were simply standing still, not blocking traffic, not interfering with anyone, just existing in the wrong place for too long. The law was written to keep streets clear. Over time, its meaning expanded until presence itself became suspicious. Infrastructure improved, crowds increased, public space got tighter. The wording stayed open-ended. Today, it quietly suggests that public space is conditional, and permission is implied, not guaranteed. Fact 32. When silence is safer than speaking. In several jurisdictions, disorderly conduct laws are broad enough to criminalize unnecessary noise. The problem was never volume, it was unpredictability. Lawmakers preferred silence because silence is easier to manage than expression. Music got louder, cities got busier, life got noisier. The law stayed abstract. Today, it leaves legality up to interpretation, reminding people that being quiet has always been the safest option. Fact 33. When helping can look like a crime. In some places, feeding people in public without a permit has been illegal. The law wasn't about food safety, it was about control. Large gatherings made officials uncomfortable, so assistance itself became regulated. Need didn't disappear, hunger didn't decline. Volunteers adapted. The rule stayed firm. Today, it quietly reframes kindness as something that requires authorization. Fact 34. When a sign becomes a threat. In certain areas, holding a sign in public can require a permit. The intent was crowd management. The result was message management. Instead of regulating obstruction, the law regulated expression. Technology exploded. Protests evolved. Messages multiplied. The permit stayed relevant, at least on paper. Today, it implies that speech is acceptable only after being scheduled. Fact 35. When walking has conditions. In some states, it has been illegal to cross the street outside designated areas. This law began as a safety measure. Over time, enforcement shifted toward revenue and compliance. Cities redesigned streets. Pedestrian behavior adapted. Jaywalking became normal. The law stayed enforceable. Today, it reminds us that even movement can be criminalized when systems prioritize order over reality. Fact 36. When breathing becomes conditional. In some U.S. cities, laws against idle standing have effectively made it illegal to stay in one place too long without purpose. Not sleeping, not blocking traffic, just staying. The intent was control. Lawmakers wanted movement, flow, predictability. What they got was a rule that quietly suggests stillness itself can be suspicious. Life slowed down. People waited. Public space became crowded. The law stayed impatient. Today, it implies that if you're not going somewhere, you might already be doing something wrong. Fact 37. When common courtesy requires permission. In certain jurisdictions, organizing a small neighborhood event without a permit can be illegal. The law wasn't written for block parties. It was meant to prevent unrest. But over time, the threshold for gathering kept shrinking. Community changed. Social life became informal. Neighbors adapted. The law stayed formal. Today, it quietly reminds people that togetherness is acceptable as long as it's scheduled. Fact 38. When your intent matters more than your action. Some laws criminalize intent to loiter or intent to cause disruption, even without action. The goal was prevention. The result was speculation. Instead of judging behavior, the system began judging assumptions. Society grew more complex. Public trust declined. Suspicion became routine. The law stayed vague. Today, it suggests that legality can hinge on what someone thinks you were about to do, not what you actually did. Fact 39. When order becomes the goal. In many places, minor infractions exist not to stop harm, but to maintain order. Standing here, crossing there, sitting too long. Each rule makes sense alone. Together, they form a web where compliance matters more than reason. The city adapted. People learned the shortcuts. Tickets kept being written. The law stayed unquestioned. At some point, order stopped being a tool and became the objective. Fact 40. When nothing is actually removed. Many outdated laws are never officially repealed. They're just ignored. Ignored laws don't disappear. They wait. They remain searchable, enforceable, technically valid, and ready to resurface when convenient. That's the final absurdity. Not that these laws exist, but that a system built on logic is perfectly comfortable leaving them there. So far, we've seen laws written for horses that no longer walk the streets, disasters that no longer happen, and fears that no one remembers having. We've watched ordinary behavior, standing still, sitting down, crossing a street, laughing at the wrong moment, quietly transform into something that once required legal attention. Not because these actions were dangerous, but because at some point they made someone uncomfortable. What connects all of this isn't ice cream, donkeys, sidewalks, or permits. It's the pattern. A moment of panic turns into a rule. A rule turns into a statute, and the statute stays long after the moment disappears. Society adapts faster than the law ever does. People change how they live, how they move, how they speak. Systems, on the other hand, prefer to leave things exactly where they were last written down. That's how you end up with laws no one enforces, but no one removes. Rules that exist in theory, not practice, until the day theory decides to show up in real life. Because legality doesn't depend on how often something happens. It depends on whether the text is still there. And the text is still there. These laws aren't mistakes. They're leftovers. Legal fossils from a time when control felt simpler, fears felt urgent, and nobody imagined the world would change this much. Somewhere along the way, common sense moved forward. The system stayed behind. And if all of this feels strangely familiar, that's because this isn't just about laws. It's about what happens when nothing ever gets fully cleaned up. Maybe stupidity isn't the opposite of intelligence. It's what happens when intelligence goes unsupervised. Because none of what you've just heard exists due to a lack of smart people. These laws weren't written by fools. They were written by people reacting to fear, pressure, outrage, or urgency. In their moment, each decision probably felt reasonable, necessary even. That's the uncomfortable truth. The problem isn't that humans make mistakes. The problem is what happens after the mistake. Systems are very good at creating rules. They are far less interested in revisiting them. Once something is written down, it gains a strange kind of authority. It stops needing context. It stops needing justification. It just exists, quietly, officially, waiting for relevance to return. And relevance always returns eventually, not because the law suddenly makes sense again, but because the right situation appears, the wrong person, the wrong moment, a technicality looking for an excuse. That's how outdated rules stay powerful, not through enforcement, but through availability. We like to believe that progress automatically deletes the past, that as society evolves, the system updates itself. But what really happens is simpler and far more human. We move on, the paperwork doesn't. We always reach for the impossible, but sometimes it's because no one stopped to ask if we should. No one asked if the law still matched reality. No one asked if the fear that created it still existed. No one asked if keeping it made sense, because asking requires effort, and effort requires attention. And attention is the one thing modern systems rarely have enough of. So instead, the laws stay, dormant, ignored, perfectly legal, until they aren't ignored anymore. And when that happens, people don't argue with the law, they argue with logic, with context, with common sense. Things the system was never designed to recognize. If all of this feels unsettling, it should. Not because these laws are absurd, but because they reveal something very normal, that systems don't rot loudly. They rot quietly, by accumulation, by neglect, by assuming someone else will clean it up later. And later never comes. This has been The Absurdist Files, where logic takes a vacation and reality writes the jokes.